Shalom and welcome to the Middle East Report. In this program today we'll be discussing what are some of the challenges facing the Jewish community, but also marking Israel's 75th anniversary as a nation reborn. Warm welcome to the programme, and today's special guest is all the way from Essex. His name is Steven Winston. He's the new Managing Director of the National Jewish Assembly. Steve, it's great to have you back on the Middle East Report after a couple of years. Can you just share with us, because the last time you were on the programme you were the Executive Director of the Zionist Federation, but now you are the Director of the National Jewish Assembly. But if you could just unpack a little bit of the story of what happened to the Zionist Federation. You know, this is one of the oldest, most established Israel advocacy organizations in this country, amongst the Jewish community, that predated the modern state of Israel, and sadly, as an organization, is no longer around. So can you tell us the story of what happened?
Yes, certainly. Can I start by saying that it's an honour to be back here, pleasure to be back here, so thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Yes, so we're now 2023 March, so in 2021 the Zionist Federation, which as you say is the oldest Zionist federation in the world, after the World Zionist Organisation was formed in 1897, just 2 years later, the British Zionist Federation was formed, and this year will be its 124th anniversary. In 2021, the National Council had its biennial elections, and the more left-leaning organisations had mobilised and came out with most of the seats, and which was fine. It had traditionally and historically been like that anyway for quite a number of years. And unfortunately, because of the timing, the fact that COVID was still lingering, finances were tight for everyone as a result of the COVID fallout. Funding became more and more difficult to raise, and for better or worse, the National Council decided to make everyone redundant. Keeping just one person on to do some daily admin, and kind of put it on ice. So it's not gone forever. I'm sure they will be back. It still exists. It still exists in name, but it exists pretty much in name only. And it remains to be seen how active or not they will be in the future. Yeah, it's very sad. To see.
Well, it's very sad. Such an historic organisation that played its part also in helping to write the Balfour Declaration of 1917 Absolutely. As well, which was essentially Israel's birth certificate. Yeah. So a great heritage with the Zionist Federation, and I just pray that they'll be back. But share with us, well, you've had a year off between your time being a Zionist Federation, going back to your profession, which is architecture, and then you've jumped back into Israel advocacy again. Can you share with us that time that you had off, that you could reflect a little bit on Israeli advocacy in the UK, what things are working, what things are not working, and why you decided to re-engage in the fight, because it is a fight?
Okay, so I think to respond to that, I need to shed some light on what was happening around the same time that myself and my colleagues at the ZF were made redundant. There was an incident, an issue going on with the Board of Deputies, whereby one of its vice presidents had been the target of having his social media accounts looked at over going back many years. They found a couple of things that really were of no consequence, but they bigged them up, and he was asked to leave. So he contacted me, and he wanted to create another organisation which is now the National Jewish Assembly, the organisation I head. You know, free of the sort of sidling up to the woke culture that is increasingly pervasive in today's society. I came on board as an advisory board member, as their vice chairman. And whilst I was doing my year off, so to speak, back in my profession of architecture, you know, I saw that, and I felt really that my passion lied with Israel, with the Jewish community here, and supporting Israel. And so, you know, now I'm here. The rest is history.
I'm so pleased you are, because I think if you weren't involved in Israel advocacy, then your talents and your passions would be wasted. So indeed. I think you've made a wise choice, but it is literally a fight standing up for Israel. But can you share with us the remit of your new organisation, the National Jewish Assembly, how it came about, your activities? Because, you know, the one thing that's really missing, I think, within the Jewish community was very much of a grassroots organisation that could mobilise members of the Jewish community really to say, look, we're fighting Israel's cause in Parliament, in the media, against BDS, and so therefore a grassroots based organisation is absolutely needed, particularly with the absence of the ZF.
Sure. So, like I said earlier, the NJA came about primarily, you know, around the same time that I left the ZF, and Gary Mond, our chairman, resigned from the Board of Deputies. And look, we created the National Jewish Assembly to be, in the words of Abraham Lincoln, I think it was, a voice of the Jewish people, for the Jewish people, by the Jewish people. And that's what we are. Fully, you know, a voice for everyone who wants to become a member. And we operate around our three basic pillars, which are standing up for Israel, supporting Israel. That doesn't mean supporting the government, it just means supporting Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people, its right to exist, its right to self-defense, etc. Standing up against anti-Semitism, which is unfortunately, you know, interlinked with standing up for Israel, and supporting Jewish life in the UK. So just being very proud of those three pillars. And that's where our work centres around. And as I say, you know, we're now 11 months old. We're coming up for almost a year old. We have a growing number of members, and we're looking to increase, and we will increase that membership base, and we'll become increasingly representative of a major part of the Jewish community here in the UK.
Well done. I'm so pleased, and that's great news as well. Hopefully, you can give me more guests for this programme as well. That would be really helpful, Steve. Now, in this programme as well, we're also marking an incredible milestone in Israel's modern history, that the modern state of Israel will be very soon 75 years old, which is quite incredible. Just share with us your thoughts of where you think Israel is at 75.
It's a toughie because of everything that's going on with Israel's government and the proposed judicial reforms. But if we look at Israel the country, not at its politics, if we just look at Israel the country, well, it's a global leader in so many different fields: high-tech, medicine, agriculture, sending humanitarian aid across the world wherever it's needed, even when it's in countries that don't have diplomatic relations with Israel. And when you look at how Israel was recreated, if you like, they've gone from a desert to a blooming economy, a world economy. They're a major player, and I think that's a lot of reason to be proud of Israel. And you know, like I said, there's obvious issues in Israel at the moment that the Israeli people are rallying against. That's not to say that the majority of them are rallying. There are many rallying against the proposals. There are many who are in favour of some or more proposals. But we've got to look at Israel the country. Absolutely. Over its politics. Every country is more than just its political political arena. It's a country that represents the only example of an indigenous people returning to their ancestral homeland. And look at how they've made that homeland grow in just 75 years. Right. When anyone goes to Tel Aviv, for example, and you see the skyscrapers, the culture, the vibrancy, and how that started off as a city built from sand dunes. It's something to celebrate, it really is.
No, absolutely. And of course, we can't talk about Israel's 75th anniversary without mentioning Theodore Herzl and his book, Der Judenstaat, The Jewish State. How do you think Theodore Herzl would now view Israel 75 years on, considering that he was the political advocate who advocated for Zionism, a return to the Jewish people, to the land of Israel, and to create a state in the heart of the Middle East, and this was his vision. And literally 50 years after he wrote his book, Der Judenstaat, the Jewish state emerged.
Indeed. I think Theodore Herzl, by the way, you know, my aim is to get a beard like Theodore Herzl.
You're halfway there.
I'm almost there. But I think he would be sad to see that a Jewish state has not managed to overcome the disease, if you like, of anti-Semitism. And many a greater person than myself have said in the past that whereas classic anti-Semitism used to target, you know, individuals or groups of Jews, modern anti-Semitism has morphed. Unlike any other form of racism, anti-Semitism morphs with time, and it has come to target the Jew of the nations, the Jew amongst the nations, Israel, and that form of anti-Semitism is something that is throughout our society, and you know, I think that would sadden Herzl to see that. I think he would be thrilled to see how vibrant Israel is, how successful Israel is, how it's the tiny dot that it represents on the globe, how it has come to be a flourishing, innovative world leader in, you know, as I've said already, in so many different fields, humanitarian, offering assistance to anyone and everyone, everywhere where they need it. You know, most recently in Turkey with the earthquakes, and Syria offering and sending their assistance. I think they had the second largest team of humanitarian workers, search and rescue people there in Turkey recently. So I think he'd be very proud of Israel. But like many Jews and many Zionists, I think at the moment, if he were to look at Israel, he'd have his concerns. But I think he would have faith that Israel can withstand everything that it's going through at the moment internally, and be faithful. You know, have the faith that it will come through it, and will be all the more strong.
Absolutely. And Steve, couldn't you also argue that if it wasn't for the modern state of Israel, that Jewish communities across the world would have faced over the past 75 years acts of genocide? And without the IDF there protecting the Jewish community and the nation of Israel, there wouldn't be a Jewish state. And of course, you know, we only have to look at the plight of, for example, of the Ethiopian Jews. Yeah. Could have faced massacres at the hands of the Sudanese government in the late 70s, early 80s, and other vulnerable Jewish communities. So, you know, the fact is that Israel's the only nation in the world where the Jewish people and yourselves can celebrate your Jewish feasts and holidays. You can wear the skull cap. You can actually be Jewish without any fear of persecution from the state. So in many ways, it's not the complete answer to Jew hatred, but the world would be a more dangerous place for Jewish people if it wasn't for the state of Israel.
Absolutely, you're 100% correct. I mean, Israel has restored a lot of pride in being Jewish. Historically, over the past 75 years, what it's undertaken, like you mentioned, the rescue of the Ethiopian Jews, the rescue of the hostages in Entebbe, the winning of the War of Independence, and the Six-Day War, regaining Jerusalem, unifying Jerusalem, and declaring Jerusalem its capital. I think that has restored, or that has emboldened the Jewish communities across the diaspora with a strength. That's not to say that everyone is supportive of everything that Israel does from within the Jewish community, but that's the same that could be said for not every British person supports everything that their government does. It's just the way of the world. But Israel as a nation state for the Jewish people, definitely something to stand up and be proud of and fight for.
Definitely.
And support.
So let's have a look now at this excellent news report put together by CBN that looks at the spiritual father of the nation of Israel, which is Theodore Herzl.
Here at the highest point of Mount Herzl, the grave of modern Israel's most famous founder overlooks Jerusalem and the nation he fought so hard for the Jews to once again possess. Theodore Herzl, a refined Jewish gentleman living in Europe, saw a growing hatred of Jews in the late 1800s and feared the prejudice would never end. That's when he realized God's chosen people needed a safer place to live and sought to take them back to their sacred homeland.
Imagine where the Jewish people were 125 years ago. Broken, lost, wandering, homeless. And this guy, with piercing black eyes and a beautiful black beard and a real sense of dignity, says, we are a people, we have ties to a particular homeland, and the right to establish a state on that homeland. Zionism. We're going to return to Zion.
In an effort to keep Israel's history alive for new generations, professor and Jerusalem Post commentator Gil Troy has edited the 3-volume Zionist writings of Theodore Herzl.
He saw that at a time when the French were becoming more French and the Italians were becoming more Italian, and there was this amazing thing called America coming together, that it was a moment of nationalism. And in order for the Jews to be accepted, truly respected, they needed their own home. Unfortunately, there was this ugly disease called anti-Semitism, which too many Europeans couldn't get over. It traumatized Herzl. And he said, wait a minute, I'm not going to give in to despair, although he has his dark moments. I'm not going to give up. I'm going to find a way home.
Herzl, a journalist and playwright, wrote of a strong, confident new breed of people establishing this Jewish homeland.
The idea must wing its ways into the most remote, miserable holes where our people dwell. They will awaken from their gloomy torpor. Then, activated, a generation of marvelous Jews will spring into existence.
He lobbied world leaders and assembled Jews from all over to Basel, Switzerland for the first World Zionist Congress. That set off a powerful Zionist movement and led to a prophecy.
August 29th, 1897, he calls together 208 Jews. And by the way, says, meet in formal dress, because we're dignified people. We're not losers. And he says, after that Congress, and he puts it in his diaries, but he won't put it in public. He says, nobody's going to believe me, but in Basel we founded the Jewish state. And 50 years from now, people are going to see that I'm right. And indeed, 50 years later, the United Nations on November 29th, 1947, voted to recognize that Zionist idea, that the Jews are a people, they have ties to a particular homeland, and the right to establish a state on that homeland. And a year later, so 51 years later, May 1948, Israel was established. And so he really was a prophet.
Activists began to push for a Jewish homeland, and thousands began moving to what the Bible called the Promised Land. The Jews had been scattered from here some 1,300 years before, and though many believed their ancient homeland to be lost forever, Herzl had faith.
Here's this guy leading this broken, scattered people, but he believes in the power of an idea. He believes that ideas are the force that can move history. Ideas are a force that can reunite people.
Although Herzl died in 1904, his influence helped lead to the 1917 Balfour Declaration, which endorsed the idea of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. Herzl's dream was well on its way to fruition. He'd always believed if you push hard enough, a dream, an idea, could become a reality. He wrote that this particular dream of a Jewish return to Zion must be made real.
It is as old as our people, which has never, even in times of direst misery, ceased to cherish it. The Jewish state is something the world needs, and consequently, it will come into being. And it has.
There you go, an excellent tribute to the great man himself, Theodore Herzl, and his book, Der Judenstaat, The Jewish State. And if you don't know anything much about Theodore Herzl, can I recommend that you research him, because he is essentially one of Israel's spiritual fathers, and certainly a prophet before his time. And his work that he did in campaigning for a Jewish state is a reality today. Obviously, God's plans come to fruition, but he played a major role in making that happen. It's great to honour the great man himself, Theodore Herzl, and to go to the Theodore Herzl Museum in Jerusalem.
Fantastic experience.
And to see his grave as well. And I think he would be very, very proud knowing how the world has changed since he wrote the book Der Judenstaat. Of course, the First World War hadn't come into play, the Second World War with the Holocaust, and now at the ashes of the Holocaust, the modern state of Israel has emerged. Steven, when we look at the modern state, we have to acknowledge the fact that the modern state of Israel is a miracle. As you mentioned earlier in the program, there's no other nation that has been destroyed and then has revived its nationhood. But Israel hasn't done that once, it's done it twice. In the history of the Jewish people. First with the Babylonians destroying Jerusalem and Judea, and then the Persian kings like Cyrus bringing the Jewish people back, as we can read throughout the Old Testament, to the land of Israel, rebuilding the Second Temple through likes like Nehemiah. But then in our day we see this restoration of the modern state of Israel, the restoration of a dead language, the Hebrew language, which is alive again today. The fact that when Israel was declared as a state back on the 14th of May 1948, that Israel was surrounded by 5 Arab armies that wanted to destroy it at birth. And we saw that Israel won that war and has fought 5 major wars in history, including lots of terrorism wars, was boycotted by the Arab states. And yet, despite being in the world's most hostile region of the world, Israel's not only survived, but she's flourished, and also absorbing huge Jewish populations from all over the world. Whatever you look at Israel today, you've got to say that Israel is an incredible success story.
Yeah, and some would argue it's a modern-day miracle, with bringing in the exiles, gathering them in from every corner of the world, and it's still going on. And like you say, it's the value of what it gives to the world in terms of technology and medicine. It's agriculture. It's used everywhere across the globe, and I think that there are so many reasons to support Israel, to celebrate it. Unfortunately, these days Israel is seen very much through the lens of the conflict. But Israel, as we know, it's far more than politics, and it's far more than the conflict. As we come to 75 years of Israel, it's just a blink of an eye in time. 75 years is a metaphorical blink of an eye, and yet so much has been accomplished, and they've literally taken a desert land and they've built up a country, and a country to be proud of. And I think in terms of its achievements, one of the most recent achievements, you look at the Abraham Accords, and that was previously unthinkable, that some of the Arab states would reach out and make peace with Israel, create diplomatic ties with Israel. And when you look at the Abraham Accords, there's so much that is benefiting all of those countries, Israel included. There's so much going backwards and forwards between the two countries, development and cooperation and collaboration, that it was previously unthinkable, and yet, there it is in a very volatile area of the world, and it's managed to further its peace agreements beyond that of Jordan and Egypt.
No, absolutely, which is absolutely incredible. And the fact that Israel now has the 4th largest economy in the world as well is an incredible success story. Thanks to Israel's startup nation. But Steve, part of the National Jewish Assembly, you are celebrating Israel at 75. In Hebrew, what is known as Yom Hatmautz on Wednesday, the 26th of April. Share with us what this celebration will involve and how our viewers can get along and really kind kind of mingle and make friends with our Jewish brothers and sisters like yourself?
Sure, with pleasure. So we have decided to host our party on the Wednesday, the 26th of April. And as you can see from the TV screen, it will run from 6:30 in the evening till 9:30 in the evening, and it will be based in a northwest London venue. El Al have kindly come on board, no pun intended, but they have donated 2 return economy flights. So we will have 2 prize draws on the night, and every person who has a ticket will be entered into the prize draw. So there'll be 2 lucky people who will go home that night with 1 economy return flight to Israel. Obviously, terms and conditions apply, and that can all be seen on the website, which is detailed on the screen. We've chosen to do it on the 26th because we are aware that there is another organisation hosting a major event on the 14th of May, which is the Gregorian date. We are holding it on the Jewish calendar, which with Yom Hatmautz, it comes in on the 25th, the evening of the 25th of April, where it transitions from its Remembrance Day, Yom HaZikaron, where the country goes into mourning for the soldiers lost and the victims of terror. And then it goes from mourning to jubilation, celebrating Israel's Independence Day. And so we are holding it on the evening of the actual day of Yom Hatmautz. And there will be a live band headed by an Israeli chap who lives here in the UK, with some other singers. There'll be lots of singing and dancing. There'll be Israeli-style refreshments. There'll be activities for the children. And together with the World Zionist Organization and Stand With Us, and hopefully some other organizations will come on board in the coming weeks, we simply wanted to give the community, Jewish community, Christian Zionist community, anyone who has an affinity for Israel, to be able to come and celebrate this important milestone. And we hope that everyone will.
Excellent. So we're just going to put on the screen one last time. So our viewers watching who would like to celebrate Israel, and I tell you, it's great actually waving the Israeli flag around. I personally enjoy that, and I love people that do that as well. It's not quite as good as being in Israel when you see how patriotic the Israelis are waving their flags, but a great opportunity to wave the flag and demonstrate your love and support for Israel. So how can our viewers attend, and if they want to attend this event to mark Israel's 75th anniversary as a nation?
So all they need to do is either visit the website address or call us on the number or email us at the address on the flyer on the screen at the moment. If they can go online and purchase tickets, the tickets are just £15 for adults, £10 for children, and concessions. So concessions are the disabled people, unemployed, and other concessions, OAPs, for example. And just come along, be a part of this historical event, because it will be literally just celebration. There will be no politics. It will just be about music, food, dancing, and singing along.
Fabulous. Sounds great. So well done for organising that, I think. And also after COVID to actually then have big gatherings as well. Yeah. It is very special. Sure. Steve, share with us what you think are the current challenges facing the Jewish community right now. We've seen as we've mentioned earlier, beginning of the program, one of the big advocacy organisations for Israel is no longer there. We are seeing an unprecedented rise of Jew hatred in this country, and we'll talk a little bit more about the Community Security Trust's annual report for anti-Semitic instances in 2022 shortly. But we know that your community is definitely beleaguered, and that's why as Christians it's vital that we stand with you and your community, that we speak up against Jew hatred, and we just bring that friendship in reinsurance, because it's absolutely vital in these days to do that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely vital to stand together against any form of hate, including anti-Jewish hate. And that's just it, that all too often the anti-Jewish racism, the anti-Jewish hatred, the anti-Semitism is all too often brushed aside and minimised. Often when it's manifested in terms of Israel, There are too many people who are willing to excuse it, blaming Israel for the anti-Semitism, and that's just absolute nonsense. We know it's nonsense, and we must not tolerate that. We must stand up loud and proud, against all forms of hatred, including the hatred that targets the Jewish people. And unfortunately, you know, as the Community Services Trust, Security Trust, their report has shown, an alarming increase in the number of anti-Semitic attacks throughout the UK. You know, there's often not a couple of weeks go by when we don't hear of an anti-Semitic attack in Stamford Hill, where the community are visibly Jewish, the Haredi community, within the North London community, where they're perhaps not even so visibly Jewish, but they may have a skull cap, the kippah, on their head. They may have a Star of David around their neck, or a chai. You can be on a bus. And a friend of mine a couple of months ago, this year, was on a bus in North London, and she had a tirade of anti-Semitic abuse hurled at her by a woman on the bus for no reason. And this is happening, and it's going on. And unfortunately, often the anti-Semitism does come from an anti-Zionist perspective as well. When Israel was fighting its Guardian of the Walls operation in May 2021, we had the convoy came through North London screaming the most obscene remarks through a megaphone. Unfortunately, none of them were actually were brought to justice. They went through the courts, and unfortunately, nothing major happened to them. They were let off. And I think that emboldens a lot of people. And we've just got to be vigilant and call it out wherever it is. And sometimes our own, it comes from our politicians, and we've got to call it out wherever it comes from. Recently, the National Union of Students were found to have been totally inadequate in combating anti-Semitism, and part of and actually facilitating the anti-Semitism and failing its Jewish students. Several years ago, when with Jeremy Corbyn, we then had the Equalities and Human Rights investigation into Corbyn, which found that there were just so many incidences of anti-Semitism. I don't believe it will ever go. It's like I said earlier, it's a disease that morphs with time and world events. When COVID hit, it was the Jews. When the Grenfell Tower happened, it was the Zionists. It's nonsense. To any reasoned person, it's absolute nonsense. But unfortunately, in this country and the wider world, these people, they're often vociferous. They're often in positions of power, and they peddle their hatred in that way.
Which is disturbing, and that's why we've really got to speak up against it, and everyone can do something about it. If you hear someone abusing a member of the Jewish community, that's not acceptable. It's that social action, I think, to make people say, and if people are having a conversation which is negative towards Jewish people, then surely the thing to say is to rebut that. Don't remain silent, and that's the key. Don't remain silent in the face of Jew hatred. And Steve, I mean, according to the Community Security Trust's reports for anti-Semitic instances of 2022, these are ones that have been actually reported to the police or reported to CST, and probably the number is probably a lot larger for those who haven't reported any anti-Semitic instances. Yeah. But one aspect of their report saying it's the fifth largest number of anti-Semitic instances on record, and the highest was in 2021. That was increased by Israel's defensive war against Hamas in Gaza in 2021. But also with this report is so disturbing is that saying the vast majority of those who are committing anti-Semitic incidences are actually school children, teenagers in schools. And this is so surprising considering that we have International Holocaust Memorial Day. There are films about the Holocaust or the Shoah, documentaries, interview with Holocaust survivors, and it's even on the English national curriculum. So this is something that we have to protect the next generation, particularly that young generation of teenagers and school children, of the dangers of Jew hatred, because this is something, as you said, it's a disease. It may outwardly attack the Jewish people, but inwardly it destroys the individual themselves. And just speak up about how our government, the Department of Education, needs to do more to combat Jew hatred, because this is, once this is out of control, then it has the potential to destroy kind of Western civilization and our fabric of society and everything else that goes with it.
Well, I think, we've got to remind ourselves that no child is born to hate. It's often a learned, something that they've learned from seeing their parents perhaps engaging in a less than desirable dialogue about one or more people, a group of people, ethnic group or religious group. But also we live in an age where children from a very early age are just overloaded with information from social media, from the internet. Taking social media alone, the youngsters now, I sound old calling them youngsters, but children and teenagers nowadays, they're on Instagram. It's almost like us oldies kind of came onto Facebook, and now that we've frightened all of the youngsters off of it. But they're on Instagram, they're on TikTok, and those platforms, they're on Twitter. Those platforms are sewers. They are sewers of anti-Semitic hatred. That's not to say that they don't have other forms of hatred as well. It's, anti-Muslim hatred, anti-black racism on there. But with the reporting in this country about Israel, people like groups, organisations like the BBC, who consistently fail to uphold their own values of neutrality and impartiality when covering the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, when they see articles that peddle this anti-Israel narrative, it's unsurprising that more and more children, more and more teenagers are peddling in spreading anti-Semitism. It's disturbing, of course. And the government, it behoves the government to stand up and take serious action, increase the Holocaust education, but also it behoves every facet of society to actually just stand up. And when it comes to anti-Zionist anti-Semitism, is there more that can be done to educate school children around that? Because it is such a central conflict in this world. Absolutely. Unfortunately, it's still going on. Is there more that the government can do to highlight the reality, the history of it, and bring about a much needed semblance of balance? Perhaps that's one way that the government could take action.
Absolutely. So let's have a look at this excellent CBN news report, and this is from the other side of the pond in the United States. And this is a warning of how Jew hatred has actually gone mainstream in the United States and is also having, sadly, a cultural impact.
Anti-Semitism is rising, and American Jewish commitment to traditional values and Israel is in decline. 89% of American Jews say anti-Semitism is a problem in the U.S. today. Over 25% say they were the victim of an anti-Semitic incident last year. Well, our next guest is concerned about that and what he believes is a decline in Jewish traditions and knowledge. Leo Leibovitz is an author, editor-at-large at Tablet Magazine, host of the weekly Jewish podcast Unorthodox. Leo, it's a pleasure to discuss this with you. So first, a rise in anti-Semitism. 1 out of 4 American Jews say they were a victim of anti-Semitism last year. So why the increase here in America? What do you think?
First of all, thank you so much for having me on. I think it's a long and sordid story But put briefly, it's this. We have always had a scrum of Jew haters in this country, but thankfully, blessedly, it was a pretty small group of bigots. What we're seeing in the last 10, 15, 20 years is that to the ranks of the Jew haters are now added people in previously hallowed positions. We're looking at university professors. We're looking at broadcasters. We're looking at social media influencers. We're looking at people with real authority and social credibility who are now not afraid to use their lecterns and their platforms to say things like the sole Jewish state in the world has no right to exist, to say things like Jews, the most persecuted minority in America right now, are somehow privileged and should step back. That, I think, is news. It's a change. It's a change in the sort of cultural zeitgeist as well as in the physical behavior and patterns in America. And it's one that's sadly taking a lot of Jews, especially liberal Jews, who thought they were part of the good fold of the good people, by surprise.
Well, I think social media, as you say, it probably has played into that as well. So are you concerned about a decline in the commitment of recent generations to traditional Jewish practices and values? Tell us what's happening there.
So I'm deeply concerned about that, sir. I think that if you look at American Jews, and I don't think we're different than Christians and perhaps Muslims too in this regard, you see a generation of young people that was pretty much raised to treat Judaism like something that you put in an escrow account and could worry about that much later. Not a real thing, not a lived-in tradition, not something that you do, but rather some identity that you checked in a box. You went to synagogue 3 times a year and everything was okay. I think part of this rise in anti-Semitism, part of this kind of noted hatred that you're seeing is gladly, if it has any upside, it's that it's pushing a lot of people to realize that being Jewish is not a possibility. Doing Jewish is really the only way forward, a real lived-in identity. You have to learn something. You have to do something. You have to represent this faith and live it, embody it, rather than just wear it on like a jacket. And if anything good's going to come from this shocking rise in anti-Semitism, Gary, it's this.
Well, you were born in Israel, from Herzliya. Tell us about the decline in commitment to Israel, because it seems that many evangelical Christians are more concerned than many American Jews about helping and standing with Israel. Why?
That is true, and God bless them for that. I think Israel is a very, very special place. I think Israel is not another normal country. Israel really represents the kind of perfect coming together of faith, of family, of nation. And if you care very deeply about these 3 things, then by default, you care very deeply about Israel. I think the tragedy is that a lot of secular Americans and a lot of American Jews count themselves, sadly, in this group. Look at these 3 pillars. Look at faith, look at family, and look at nation, not as strongholds to be rooted in and to be protective of, but rather as problematic things to grapple with, as source points, as focal points for oppression, for regression, for all kinds of bad things. If you reject these things, if you reject family, reject faith, reject nationalism, then Israel is the problem for you. If you understand that they are the bedrock of human civilization, then Israel is something to embrace, love, and be very proud of.
Do you think there's a connection then between this rise in anti-Semitism and a decline in this commitment to Israel, also the Jewish faith? Maybe younger American Jews think if they become less Jewish, they'll avoid persecution?
I think that's absolutely the case. Look, it's never a fun thing or a particularly instructive way to see the world in binary terms. But I think we're really looking at America right now and seeing 2 camps, Team A and Team B. On Team A are people who are interested in extreme atomized individualization, who see every interpersonal interaction as necessarily all about power, who worry very much about where this power lies and who always want more of it, who speak in the language of victimization and privilege. And then the other team, Team B, and I call it Team B because we're not the people who run the media. We're not the people you will find in the Ivy League universities. We're not the people you will find in the classrooms and boardrooms of this great nation. But in Team B, we believe in family. and we believe in faith, and we believe in the nation. And when we look at these values, we understand that as complicated as they may be, and as deeply divergent we may be from other people who hold different faiths, we're in this group together fighting not just for the future of Israel, but for the future of America as well.
Yay for Team B. Okay, Leo Leibowitz, Tablet Magazine, host of the Unorthodox podcast. Thank you for providing those insights. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. God bless you.
And, that's happening in the United States. And let's just remember that the United States and Canada, North America, really haven't been infected with Jew hatred until about 2011. And how things have now gone mainstream is extremely disturbing. And the same challenges facing the Jewish community in the United States is also one facing the British community as well. Clearly, the Jewish community in the United States is more powerful, it's more prosperous than the UK Jewish community. I think it's also more prominent as well, and that's maybe because the history of the United States accepting the Jewish community from the word go, as George Washington, when he was fighting his war for independence, needed Jewish money to finance the campaign, and in return for that finance, really propelled the Jewish community into incredible positions of leadership within his government. And ever since then, the Christians and Jews, our Judeo-Christian heritage, has flourished in the United States and has been intertwined and part of American culture, which is sadly not the case here. But can you just share some of the challenges also facing the Jewish community in here in terms of your dwindling numbers and the secularization that's also going on that's diluting the community?
So look, the problems that are being faced here are not atypical. They're not exclusive to the British Jewish community, like you just mentioned. The increasing prevalence of secularism in society, that's hit the Jewish community, and it's an issue that we all need to face up to. As a parent myself, it's a worrying trend, but you can only do what you can do. And you can, my kids were raised, for example, like many other Jewish families across the country, to be observant of their religion. They get to an age and they can drift. And it's, it happens. But I think the biggest threat to British Jews is anti-Semitism. And a lot of the anti-Semitism comes from a perspective of anti-Zionist anti-Semitism. And, I think you'll agree that probably not a day goes by without there being some kind of problematic coverage of Israel in our media. Yep. And that causes a problem. Children see it, as we were saying earlier, on social media. They see this reporting with a lack of context. They see ministers and politicians speaking out against Israel with a lack of context. And so they're emboldened to think, well, blimey, this Jewish country, Israel, the Jews, the British Jews support Israel, therefore they've got to be as bad as the Jews in Israel themselves. They often just see the Jews as some kind of inherent evil. We are lucky that we have a solid infrastructure in the Jewish community. We are very, very privileged to have the Community Security Trust. They do amazing work in protecting Jewish life throughout the country, throughout the UK. We are very privileged to have them. We have a wonderful, wide and varied collection of Jewish organisations, Jewish education organisations. We have the Holocaust Education Trust, which does amazing work educating about the Holocaust. We have a government who, by and large, are very friendly towards Israel. British Israel trade and relations are at an all-time high. So we've got a lot to be thankful for. But we do have to remain vigilant, and anti-Semitism, I would say, is one of the major threats, alongside the, the threat of, say a threat, but secularism, and children, marrying out of the religion. It happens, and that's something that goes on all over the world within Jewish communities and other religious communities and other ethnic communities.
Absolutely. But don't we need to talk about, Steve, is the incredible contributions made by your community to this nation? With Jewish businesses, with Jewish scientists, with Jewish artists. I mean, we're talking about a tiny community, which anyone would think that the Jewish community is absolutely huge. But take, for example, North London, it's somewhere between 250,000 and maybe 300,000, which is tiny in comparison to other ethnic minority groups. You guys have been here since Oliver Cromwell, and then even before that, until kicked out of the country in 1290 by Edward I. But the contribution made towards this country is absolutely immense in terms of also raising money for charity, in supporting our institutions, the intellectual know-how that makes this country such a great country is probably Jewish brains behind it. So do you just want to briefly share the incredible contribution made to this country by the Jewish community? Because I think sometimes when we're addressing the issue of anti-Semitism, we've also got to discuss what the Jewish community does and its contribution to this country.
Yeah. I mean, I think, to cover everything that the Jewish community and its individuals within that community have contributed to society over the years, to British society, would be here forever and a day. But, at the moment, I'm talking with our advisory board, and we're talking about the chap who invented the Belisha beacon. He was Jewish. He was a Zionist. He was actually fired by, I think it was Chamberlain, at the behest of Hitler during the Second World War, because he was Jewish, and it was an appeasement by Chamberlain. He gave us the Belisha beacon, and I think the highway code as well. In modern day, we've got someone like Professor Winston, Lord Winston, for example, who's done the most amazing work in fertility. We'd be decades behind probably if it wasn't for someone like him. We've had Jewish MPs, Jewish politicians. We've got Grant Shapps, for example, in the government. He's Jewish. We do have good representation throughout society in the arts, in theatre, on TV. We are here and we're everywhere, as should be everyone. Every minority should, much like they are in Israel, represented across all of society. That's how it should be in any country. And we are fortunate enough to have that. Going back, you mentioned Oliver Cromwell. Well, the first wave of Jews to come in under him were the Sephardi Jews, who had migrated away from and fled the Inquisition, the Spanish Inquisition. Eventually, over those couple of centuries, they'd migrated up to Holland, and that's where the Jews came from. My own Sephardi ancestors included, one of which was born here, though, within the Sephardi community, a chap by the name of Daniel Mendoza, who was the first British English bare-fisted boxer.
Amazing.
And he won the English, he became the English champion in, I think, 1788 or 1789, within a year or so of the French Revolution. And there's, there's things about him in the Jewish Museum here in London. And then subsequently, moving on from him, other Jewish boxers, drew power from him. It emboldened the Jews of East London back then, because he referred to himself as Mendoza the Jew.
Amazing. Amazing.
So yeah, it's from every facet of society. there's been amazing contributions, and there continues to be, and that's the way it should be from everyone.
Absolutely. Steve, you've given a great interview today, and thank you so much for your honesty. And you've got the backing of us for the National Jewish Assembly, and so pleased that you're there advocating for Israel and the Jewish people, and we're standing with you in defending Israel, but also fighting against Jew hatred. So thank you so much. I want to thank you for watching this program today, as we've marked on some of the challenges facing the Jewish community here in the UK in 2023, but also marking Israel's 75th anniversary as a nation reborn. And this is something that we can all be proud of, because we've seen the fulfillment of Bible prophecy. So thank you for watching this week's edition of the Middle East Report.